Good morning. Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1461. Okay, so what we're in the middle of is explaining how everything, even the highest levels, are all compared to Atzmus, the true and absolute reality, the true and absolute life, Chayim, what we can call true life. Compared to that, everything is lifeless, like a lifeless desert. And the Rebbe Rashab just explained that length in the parentheses that we concluded in the last class, and I'll sum up that parentheses. But before I do, you may notice on the Ayin Beis group, I just posted a copy of the Alter Rebbe's Maimer discourse in Likutei Torah in Bamidbar, where actually the Rebbe Rashab is quoting the actual quotes from that Maimer with his explanation. And it began all the way in the back, bottom of page 1456, where he spoke about Midbar, or Midbarech Nava, that your words, and Midbar also from the word desert, Nava is beautiful, like Shchera Niva Nava, like I am dark but beautiful, that the Midbar of Gedusha includes this idea of understanding that we appreciate down in this world, in the lowest of worlds, that is itself like the void of divine revelation. It comes to teach us that Atzmus is higher than all revelation, and that all revelation is compared to Atzmus like a lifeless, desolate desert. So if you look there, you'll see the language is, the words that he uses here are quoting from there. And I specifically refer you, if you'd like to see exactly where it says, if you want to look inside, line 3, 6, basically 9, 10 lines from the top of that column, which is basically, what is that? It's page 2C. So he says these words, that a person should contemplate in his heart that even the higher world, the worlds from the highest levels, they're midbar v'shmamon, like a desolate and wilderness, a desolate wilderness. Well, let's put it, wilderness and desolation, like a daimon mamish, lifeless. This exact words, if you look on page 1460, right before the parentheses in the second paragraph, that's the exact quote from here. And then came the parentheses, which I'm going to review now, and then the language after the parentheses continues citing this Likutei Torah. So it's also fascinating to see how the Rebbe Rashab takes a maimer from the Alter Rebbe and elaborates on it. It's also the basis, I've often pointed out, the sources of what we're learning here. Okay, so that's for comparative purposes. So what do we learn in the parentheses? The Rebbe Rashab is coming to explain, how could you say that the highest worlds are lifeless? So briefly, he explained, because based on the verse, on the statement, Hashem Elokim Emes Hu Elokim Chayim, the God of truth is the God of life, is that what is truth? True reality is only something that's existence comes from within itself, not that something else gives it life, not something else creates it or sustains it. Because even if it's alive, completely alive, but if it's dependent on its connection to its source, then right away the source is obviously far superior. And you can't really call this thing alive because it's not alive on its own, like he said several times, not mitzad atzmei. And he explained this, both the body is that way. The body obviously is not alive. We're talking about the vitality of the body, a moving body, a breathing body, a living body is not alive without a soul. And even the soul is not really alive without its it's not alive without its attachment and connection to God, who willed and wanted to have that chai be'etzem. And the same thing lamaila. The kelim of Atzilus, even though they're a lakus, but their vitality comes from the oir, and the oir, its vitality comes from its source. So in essence, none of them are really alive on their own. And as such, it's only due to their connection. So what is considered real life, real truth, reality? He said that's atzmus. Mitziusim atzmuse, emes mitzad atzme, quoting the Rambam, that he says that ein la'achar emes kamitase, nothing is as true as his truth. Emes mitzad atzme, because everything needs him and he doesn't need them. And that's mitzius matzmuse. His existence comes from within himself, and vilti mitzias nimtza. It's a type of existence that it's unlike anything we know what is in existence, as we discussed at length yesterday in the last class. And that's why that's a mitis achayis, true chay v'kayim be'etzem amitose, and that means Hashem Elikim Emes Hu Elikim Chay. The one that's absolute truth is the absolute life. And that's the meaning what the Alter Rebbe says in Likutei Torah, v'zehu, that was the end of the parentheses, shekola elam is v'giluim emchinas deimim legaba atzma she'elam chayes atzmi klal. That's the meaning, that they have no life on their own, and therefore they're like a daemon, like an inanimate, lifeless entity, when you compare it to their source. But the source wants, the Eibishter wants, and infuses and gives the neshama his so-called eternal life power, so the soul is also eternal as a result of that. And with that, let's continue reading. And as I said, this is the next lines are continuing the language of Likutei Torah with that break of the parentheses that explained the lifeless statement about that everything is lifeless compared to Kadosh Baruch Hu. So if you look, you'll see it's literally word for word. So he says like this now. Ready to continue? Unless someone has any questions, I'm ready to continue here. Okay. So we're middle of page 1461. The line that ended, that we finished, is the parentheses chulu, a little more than halfway down. And the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. So now he says, as you look at Likutei Torah, I'm following along in both places. Ki ato asisa hashamayim v'shmei hashamayim. So this can be read by just going back to what was before the parentheses. Before the parentheses said that everything is lifeless, even the highest levels, compared to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And now just reading on, after the parentheses, because you created Hashamayim, heaven, and Shmei Hashamayim, and the heaven of heavens, proving that all levels, not just heaven, the heaven of heavens, referring to all levels, are created by God. And now we understand what he means by that after the parentheses, because everything needs him, even the highest levels are a product of the Eibishter. V'ato mechayes kulam. And you, these are verses that the Alter Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab are citing. And you sustain, or you energize and give life as kulam, everything. Ato dafke. So this is already the Rebbe Rashab's addition. Ata, between you, which means atzmus. Shehu is baruch chayes kol ha'ilmus. That who means specifically him, Ata, you, are the chayes, the life force of all existence. Ata mechayes kulam. So what's true chayes? Ata, not the product that God created. The einayil movadei, the efezulase, and nothing exists besides him. The efezulase, and nothing, another form of nothing, even a deeper efezulase, and nothing is besides him. V'hoyu kaloi hoyu, and everything is kala as if it doesn't exist in the face of the source. In this case, atzmus, ato. This is all back to language of Likutei Torah. Okay. So now that we have established that, what is its effect now on us? Now that we know this, and this does come, as he said, a contemplation. He used before the word kashem izbeinen ha'adam, or kashem izbeinen. Person's contemplating. What is the takeaway from this? What's the call to action, so to speak? What happens now? So the Alter Rebbe, Likutei Torah, says what happens. The Rebbe Rashab continues citing from there, and now he's going to cite a language from that he already brought earlier. You'll see this is exactly word for word what he said on page 1459. And here's what he says. Ulazois. Let me just look it up there. Yeah. Ulazois tichla. And once we know this, and you're aware of this in a very profound way, so it affects us. As we discussed yesterday, this isn't just an abstract theory and concept. This affects us because you know now where real life is. So someone will say, I'll give you a cup of water. And you see that the cup of water is coming from a source. You want the source. I mean, I'm saying that the cup of water is meaningless. But if you're going to really go for it, you want to have the source of all life. You want to connect to what is reality. You don't want to connect to what's the word I want to use? A station. That's a stop on the way. You want to go all the way to the source. So what happens? He says, a love nefesh kol chai. So nefesh kol chai, the life, the spirit of all life. Where does it drawn to? And where is it want to be absorbed by? Tichla means drawn from the word kiloyan, from being dissolved, drawn, nullified, not nullify is not the right word, subsumed, integrated. So that tichla love, that nefesh kol chai is drawn to be absorbed in ledofka boyes baruch, to attach to boyes baruch, to God, chaya chayim baruchu, the life of all life, or the source of all life. Let's see. Yeah, it's exactly the language from the Likutei Torah. Zeis tichla love nefesh kol chai, ledofka boyes baruch, chaya chayim baruchu. And then he continues quoting from the Likutei Torah. So what is the conclusion from this? That what happens now that you have established where life comes from, that's what you want to be drawn. You're drawn into that. If you look back again, on page 1459, he said exactly those words. There, the language be called but the first half is the same language from here. And he continues, to love God, your God, because he's your sustenance, he's your life force, he's chayecha, he is your very life. Pirush, I'm comparing, all this is Likutei Torah. Pirush, she'ein chayecha elohu. Loving God because he's your life, because there's no chayecha except him. He's your only life. There's no other replacement. That is the only exclusive life. This is the Rebbe Rashab is adding. Like he writes in Torah Er, Zocher Amalek. I find it interesting that he quotes the Torah Er explicitly from the Alter Rebbe. But the very language that he's using here, before this and after, is from the Likutei Torah, and he doesn't quote it. He doesn't. I looked. He doesn't actually say that it is Likutei Torah. So, and no problem. The Rebbe Rashab doesn't have to always tell us where he's taking where the source is, either to realize that we know or we'll find out. But it's interesting that here he does quote the Zocher. So it reminds me somewhat like the gloss of the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek on Likutei Torah often does that. He'll take in the Maimon and he'll say this idea is discussed elsewhere. So this tells me that the Rebbe Rashab was a given for him that we know that this is Likutei Torah. That's why he doesn't even have to mention it, because anyone learning Ayin Beis who's knowledgeable would know that this is coming from Likutei Torah. And the Rebbe Rashab is telling us that for more explanation on this topic, look in the Maimer and Torah Er. This is just an interesting note to make here. I want to see one thing here. Yeah. He may mention Likkutei Torah much earlier, but I don't think, not recently for sure. Okay. So he continues now. And the language continues from Likkutei Torah. No, sorry, it does not. No, the next line is from the Rebbe Rashab after the Zocher. She'ein eid mulvadei. He's explaining why, a key point here, not just that God is the source of all life, but is the only source of life. Remember, we're saying that even the levels of soul and and even the highest levels of Giluyim, it's true they carry God's energy and God's life. But you could say, you know what, that maybe God is the ultimate source, but he's transmitting to them. But here the Hizbonenus is deeper. You're coming to realize that the only source is God. Ein eid mulvadei. That's why he goes back and says, nothing else but him. And there's no other life, there's no other sustenance, and no other pleasure at all. Rak kihu chayecha. Only kihu, referring to Atzmus, is your life source, is the source, or is chayecha, is your very life. Shahu moked achayim, because he's the source of life, umoked tainugim, and the source of pleasures. So now he's also adding the word pleasure into the picture, which was relevant earlier as well. We'll soon see the connection, ava b'tainugim and so on. But bottom line is, this is what a person comes to down here in this world, in their contemplation, to understand, and then ultimately long, the tzemoyin and yearning for Atzmus himself, because everything else is just an extension of that, and ultimately that's the only and exclusive source of life and life itself. Okay. Let me pause here if anybody wants to ask anything.
Rabbi?
Just one second. I'm just looking here. I want to see. Okay. I'll refer back when there's more quotes from the Likkutei Torah, and I think there are as we go down. I'll point it out. But let me pause here. If any, go ahead, please.
Rabbi, when we put the talis on in the morning, it says ki im kor makor chayim, which gets translated in the blue siddur as "for with you is the source of life." So I'm trying to understand that. What does that mean?
I mean, you have to look in other discourses that discuss it. He doesn't bring that language here. There are many different terms used. Either he means a different level, or you can reconcile it with here. I'm not sure. I would have to go look it up. Since he doesn't bring it here, I don't think we need to go there. But if you want Dafka to go, there are places that discuss it. What came Chamok Chaim, and maybe they may discuss it in the context Hu Chayecha. Or maybe it's the same level as I said, or maybe it's two different levels. Not sure. I would have to research it, or if somebody wants to research it, by all means.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Okay. I mean, on most basic level, Ki'imcha Makar Chaim is another source for this, because you, Ki'imcha, with you is Makar Chaim. Which Chassidus does explain that all comes from Ercha, the that comes from the source. Okay. Any other questions before I continue? So now comes another parenthesis, another comment from the Rebbe Rashab in explaining the Alter Rebbe. Because when you say he's Mokra Chaim, Mokra Tainugim, we can mistakenly think that God is considered a source. And if you recall earlier, a number of times he said that God, everything is rooted in God, but you can't God call a source. Like when you say the Shemesh, the sun is a source of light, the sun is created to be a source of light. That's its purpose. When it comes to Atzmus, as we said, he's not dependent on anything. He doesn't have to be a source. He chose to be one. So he's going to explain that the word moker, the ein rotzeinu leimer, and his intention here when he says He's not trying to say when he says that he's the source of life and the source of pleasure, that he's an actual source. So he's qualifying, explaining when the Alter Rebbe says Moker, he doesn't mean to say, that's by the way another indication when he says that Shein Lemer means who is he talking about? Often you can't say on yourself that this is what I'm talking about. I mean, sometimes you could do that, but here it makes a lot more sense that he's saying when the Alter Rebbe says Moker, he doesn't mean actual source. He means that everything comes from him. So that Memenu Nimser, from him is found, everything is derived and originates from all achayim, all life and all pleasures. Like the Rambam's expression, from the true reality, nimtzu, from there originate, from there derive all nimtzayim, all creations. So you see this same lashon, nimtzu, as opposed to a moker, which would be, this is the source, and we're getting something from that source, which creates a more commensurate and a more proportionate relationship. Here we're talking about an infinite distance and apartness. So therefore, that's why it's qualifying, that's not a moker. Kachu binyan achayis. So just as it is with creation, the same thing is with sustenance or with the energy flow. Delias ha'emes ha'miti, delias ha'emes ha'miti va'mitis achayis kanal. Being that the God is the emes ha'miti, the true and absolute reality, and the amitis achayis, and true and absolute life, al kanal, as we discussed earlier, al kain nimtzu memenu kol b'chinas achayis v'atayim. Being that he's that reality, that's why everything is derived from there. That's the only place it can come from. All vitality and all pleasure. So that's explanation in the parentheses. Now he goes back to the language from the Likutei Torah. So, as I said, I'm following along, so it's just compare the two. Oh, well, any questions on this parentheses? Ukidiksiv, continuing on, like it says, Ru ato ki ani hu. Behold now. The pasuk says, behold now, ata, ru'u. Behold, see now, ki ani ani hu. That it's I am him. Talking about God. In the Likutei Torah, he brings the second half of that verse. The Ein Elokim imodi. And there's no other God together with me. There's no partner here. Here he just brings the first half. Ani hu. Why he doesn't bring the second half, I'm not sure. But I guess it's not necessary for the point that he wants to make. So the Isa b'Zohar Bereshis. This is also an addition from the Rebbe Rashab. In Zohar Bereshis, Daf Chav Beis Amud Beis, page 22b says, Shezeu b'chinas atzmus ein sof. Shalamaylam b'chinas hakeser. This verse, when he says ani hu, throughout the ki ani hu, is referring to atzmus higher than keser. That's why the emphasis is ani hu. And what is this level? Hu b'chinas antu chad b'chinas yachid. This is the level when we say antu chad, you are one singular. Yachid, you are singular, not just one, you're exclusively one. Echad means you're one, and there could be a number two that comes afterwards. Yachid means absolutely exclusively one. Antu chad b'chinas yachid. Umikra zeh, now he continues from the Likutei Torah. Umikra zeh al osid nemar. This verse is talking about the future. Sha'oz yemru, sha'oz yiru rather. That's when we'll see this level on Yehu. Ru'u ata is referring to L'osid Lavi. Why it says ata? Because the prophet is probably speaking ata, meaning he's speaking about the future as in the present. How does the Alter Rebbe say it? Allah never she'en she'oz yemru ru'u ata. Key. Yeah. So I see the rest of this is the Rebbe Rasha basically until we go back to the Likutei Torah, which will be in the next paragraph. It looks like. Oh, not completely. No. Okay, I'll point it out. Fine. So this goes on La'asid Lavi. What will be La'asid Lavi? La'asid Lavi will be the experience of perceiving and seeing the etzem, not just the Giluyim. U'kamesha Kosov. Like it says another verse in the prophecies, the prophets say, V'nichya lefonov. That we will live lefonov. So what does that mean? V'nichya lefonov. We'll live before him. So Chassidus explains that we will live and directly receive our chayis the chayim atzmim of atzmus ein sof. That's the diuk of lefonov. Could have said v'nichya. We shall live. Can come from many levels, but lefonov means like the primius, meaning coming the chayim atzmim from atzmus ein sof. The pasuk, because the pasuk begins, it says like this: "Yechayenu miyamayim." We will be sustained. We will arrive from yamayim. Yamayim is like 2 days. Beis yomim. What is that? That's referring to a lower level. Hein b'chinas hagiluyim desevu kalam malakalam. That's the first opening of the verse. That's the giluyim of transcendent energy and immanent energy, divine energy, but they are giluyim. And then the verse continues, says, and the third day, after these 2 stages, that's Yechem Yamayim, Seviv Kalaman, and Mamal Kalaman, will come the third day, referring to La'asid Lave, V'nichya Lefonov, Zel B'chinas Atzmus Ein Sof, Shalamayla B'chinas Seviv Kalaman, U'Mamal Kalam. So the full verse goes like this, Yechayenu Yamayim. We will receive energy from Yamayim, the 2 days, which refers to 2 levels. Seviv Kalalman, transcendent energy, Mamal Kalam. The Yom HaShlishi, the third day, referring to La'asid Lavei, V'nichya Lefonov. Then we will receive straight from Atzmus Ein Sof, which is higher than Seviv Mamala. Kamesha Kosa B'Likutei Torah Al Posek Zeh. So Zamayim Yechayenu in Likutei Torah, and he explains this idea. V'zeh V'nichya Lefonov, and that means V'nichya Lefonov. Bechinas ha'atzmus the Ein Sof. Lefonov is higher. Lefonov meaning atzmus Ein Sof. So all this is all part of one story here. The case he's making is the connection that the soul is yearning and longing to connect to atzmus Ein Sof, the very source of it all, and that's what will be La'asid Lavei when it says Ru'u Ato Ki Ani Anihu. Okay, so this is an addition that the Rebbe Rashab is adding. I want to make sure. Yeah, doesn't say that explicitly here. But and also it adds obviously depth and flavor, if you wish, because we're talking about life, the life source, that everything is lifeless compared to Atzmos. Remember, it all began with saying that everything's like a midbar. So it could be the Rebbe Rashab is making the case as strong as possible how the real life is only a life connected to Atzmus. Everything else comparatively is lifeless. Being that it's not lifeless, it's on its own, it's lifeless, obviously, because it's infused with God's life. But this brings us to La'asid Lavei when we'll have that highest level. And before I go to the parentheses, which is going to connect now whole bunch of things, I just want to stop here if anybody wants to ask anything.
But the fun of it, we're going to be directly enlivened by Atzmos, but we still won't, it seems to me that we still won't be with ourselves any different. I mean, you can still say we're not alive except through a source. It's just a very close existence if it's higher than Soviet for Hulu.
Yeah, just compare it. For example, a person can live. Let's take a physical example. A person can be physically alive in a minimal way, where they breathe and they have food and sustenance, but doesn't mean they're getting life straight from the highest levels of, it's more of like the life support that exists in this material world. When you're talking here is like you're plugging in straight into the main console, so to speak. The main source. It's like plugging right into the main artery, not just through the different channels. That's the point here. Obviously, Atzmos always remains Atzmos, but the question is, how much access do we have? So we're talking about that type of connection, that we have a direct connection all the way to the highest levels. But keep in mind, we can only get there when we do our work on the lower levels. Or else we wouldn't be primed or ready to go there. That's the work that we're doing now, all the thousands of years, that acclimates us and primes us and trains us, so to speak, to be able to connect to these highest levels. In other words, had God revealed, just a second, had God revealed Atzmus in the beginning of creation, or in some middle or in some time, it would not mean anything to us. We wouldn't be able to digest it. We wouldn't be able to relate to it at all, because we didn't do our work. Like I mentioned, then you come to B'chol Meidecha. You said before, first Av al Pitam V'das, then you come to Av L'mayla Mitam V'das. And there are many, many levels. I'm just mentioning a few. There's infinite levels. So it's critical to understand. That's why it comes day 3, can't come before you have 1 and 2.
My question is relating to his reference to Tainugim. He's not just a source of life, but he's a source of all pleasures. So, I mean, the pshat on that, at least to me, and my very simple self, is that, let's say, I love my dog or I love my wife, and I'm not just loving, blown away by them. Like, just makes me so happy to whatever, be affectionate with my. I don't want to put my wife and my dog in the same stations, of course, but like to see a beautiful creation like an animal that's nothing but God's creation, nature, or trees, or the forest, or of course the human being, such a higher level. To me, in the pshat, I understand what pleasure is, because I say, wow, God, so amazing. All these things that make me the happiest person I could be, these things that make me the happiest are you. Okay, so I'm not sure. My question is, does it mean that? Or because that's on my terms? Or is it something else? Because we've talked about Tanugim in a different respect from the Ebershus perspective.
It means what you just said, and for every person, based on the Tainugim that they have, it means what you said and much more. For a tzaddik, for example, who may not have a dog, or for someone who has pleasures, let's say, from learning Chassidus, or pleasures from Elam Haba and Gan Eden. So they would say the same thing, except it wouldn't be as mundane, I guess. Not that your pleasure are mundane, but I mean, it wouldn't be about something that's so tangible. So whatever you just said is correct, but I would add to that equation, every type of pleasure, whatever pleasure is out there, whatever a person is experiencing, even spiritual pleasure, even Gan Eden, like he says here, Giluyim Elyonim, all that goes back to the source of the real Tainug Amiti. And by the way, he's not coming to say here that we should reject the Tainugim and the Chaim that comes to us through these channels. He's just coming to understand that's not the end of the line. That's what he's coming to say, that compared to the source, it all pales in comparison. That's the point here. He's not coming to eliminate Seder Shtalshlus and all the Tainugim and Chaim that we have from all these levels and so on. He's coming to just add to it that you want to go all the way, let's go all the way,
Yes, thank you. Well, of course, I didn't mean to give these ways of mundane or tangible examples.
No, it's as I said, it's perfectly fine. It's applied to your personal life. And I said, it's perfectly legitimate to say what you said about yourself. I'm just adding that it really refers to all Tainugim there are. That's my point.
Yeah, no, I get it. But Dafka chose very tangible things intentionally.
Perfectly
but
fine.
You're saying, let's say I were to be reading I don't know, Einstein's theory of relativity, and I see some beautiful logic that it's like, wow,
Yeah.
look how seamless the way the world is put together, matter, energy, blah, and I'm like, unbelievable. And it's the same. You're saying that same, I
Yeah.
don't know,
Yes.
joy or astonishment is the Inyan of Atzmos.
Which is the mocker for all of it. Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Okay, got it.
And the same thing. The same thing is Gan Eden and Elam Haba and all the Tainugim. It says the Tainug that we have in Elam Haba. It says that the Yafer Sha'achas b'Kedah Shel Kedas Ruach b'Elam Haba Yesem Mikol Chaya Elam Hazeh. That the pleasure, 1 hour of pleasure in Elam Haba is more than all the pleasures of this world. So this includes that as well.
Yeah, although that seems more obvious because that's godliness. Now, granted, it's ha'ara, it's a reflection of asos, but that's
Okay.
now
For
you're
me,
getting into.
for me, it's the other ways. If it's that, then for sure it's the Tainugim down below.
Okay, that's funny.
Go both ways.
It's just
I understand.
Yeah, just perspective.
Yeah. I will add one thing I wanted to say. I'll slip my mind. Okay. It'll come back to me. So before I read on the next part, the parentheses, I want to just step back a bit and give back to the bigger picture that we were discussing a few days ago. Keep in mind that ultimately, if you look at the big picture here, what are we ultimately saying? We're saying like this, that God created existence and the way a beautiful existence. Like he says, Vayar Elikim Kitev. Every day he saw that it was good. He created a good world, a beautiful world. We learned earlier he created Gan Eden. Gan Eden is filled with delights, beautiful trees, a garden of delight, of pleasure. And then he placed the human being in this world. When I say world, I mean firstly Hosei Shtalshus, all the Eiris and all the Giluim before the Tzimtzum, after the Tzimtzum, all the way down. But it's the Kavana is Sava Kodesh Baruch Hu is Lasles Leis Baruch Dir B'Tachten. All of it was not meant because God wanted to show tricks that he can create pleasure, that he can create beauty, that he can create awe and astonishing, as you put it, or other experiences that are tremendous. That's not the kavanah. God is who does he have to prove it to? For sure he could do it. It all comes from him. He's the ultimate artist and musician, and beyond all that, as we said, he's not a mucker. So there's no, this explains, you can't say that's the purpose for him just to show his show off, so to speak. Even though it says in Kabbalah, in Eitz Chaim, that one of the reasons for creation is Legala Shlemus Kechesov, that God wanted to reveal and actualize the power that he had, the potential that he had. So Chassidus explains that's a good reason for Atzilus, but it doesn't explain Tachtenim. That would explain the higher worlds, because there, so-called, there you really see God's glory in the most powerful way. So ultimately, the way he puts it in Samach Vav, and the Rebbe explains this in many places, Tachlis HaKavana. There are many reasons for creation, but the ultimate reason is because he wants in Tachtenim, in Shcheira Ani, in the world that's dark and concealed, explained at length in chapter 36 in Tanya. Tachtenim shein tachten shein tachten lamatamenu. Says a cheshech kofel mechupo, a double and quadruple darkness, to the point that the divine is concealed, to the point that someone can say ani v'afsied, me and nothing else. The exact opposite. Truth is eineit milvadi, nothing but God. But we live in a world where people could say, and people do say, it's me and nothing else. The exact opposite. So a complete diametric opposite of reality. The glove is turned all the way inside out, and the glove thinks that it's more important than the hand, or doesn't even recognize there's a hand, for that matter. You know, imagine we say the tip of the iceberg thinks that that's all the reality, but it's only a tip. And the kavanah is that we, blessed a neshama, that's rooted all the way in the highest level, so it has all that potential power. comes down to this world, stage by stage by stage, slowly gets concealed. Neshama shenasata bi tahirihi atzilus barasa yitzarta nefachta bi v'ata meshamar b'ki comes into a world that needs protection, a world that is full of challenges and difficulties. Kol hadrachim b'cheskes sakonim, all the paths can be considered dangerous, or in the words of the Alter Rebbe, it's a world that is showing gravering by mole klippas v'sitra achre. It's filled with klippa, with concealments and distortions and corruption, and is showing gravering by, and the wicked can prosper and do prosper often. And not only that, they can control and hurt the tzaddikim, the righteous ones, as they have. So we're let's not minimize how difficult this world is. It's quite a challenging world. But here, Shcheirani, the Neshama says, to all the levels above, to the Neshamas above, B'nai Yerushalayim, yes, you are pure in your Yerushalayim, Yerilah, Bittul B'mitzias, beautiful. I am dark, however, but no, V'nova, but I'm beautiful. Because I have something that you'll never have. I can connect. Firstly, I developed that thirst and longing that nothing in the higher worlds has, like that type of intense rotze. And more than that, that intense rotze could also transform the darkness, like we learned. And furthermore, it teaches us not only that all these higher worlds that initially were higher than this world. That's why this world is called Tachtenim. Tachtenim, ironically, reveal a level of Atzmus that the Elyenim can't reveal. And more than that, we recognize that even all these Elyenim, including B'nai Yerushalayim, including Atzilus, including all the Giluyim all the way to the top, they too are Midbar Shmama. You talk about a wilderness, you are also a wilderness. You're not a wilderness of evil and corruption of Midbar de L'Umazeh. You're a Midbar de Gedusha, meaning but you're still a Midbar because you're lifeless without Atzmus. And it's Atzmus that we are connecting with there. And that's the kavanah of Dira B'Tachtenim in Atzmus. So there, when it all comes together, what do you have? That the support of the Elyenim was necessary. That's why we have the Malachim, and we have the B'nai Yerushalayim, and we have the Einei Ha'eda, and we have the Torah. They all illuminate that the eyes of the Neshama, the Ishin Einai, the pupil of the eye of the soul below, should be able to see in this dark world. So obviously we thank them for it because they're the cosmic support system, as we discussed. But at the end of the day, what happens below, once we get that clarity, what we can achieve is we elevate to a place that's higher than all those levels. And not only that, we elevate them as well, because we can teach them what they didn't know themselves about the infinite apartness of Atzmus itself, like we're learning now. And that's where it all comes together, that la'osed lave, you're going to have both. You're going to have the Giluyim and the Etzem. So the soul in our times is the one that educates and guides the body. So the Sham is Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom. Our soul, what would we be like if we didn't have a soul? An inanimate body in this world? We'd have no direction, no guidance. Same idea without Torah. Without a Torah that shines a light on the dark roads of existence, we wouldn't have a roadmap, a blueprint. But afterwards, when the guf, once it has that direction, the guf can now reveal a level of atzmus, v'nichya lefonov, that is even higher than the Chai Neshama itself. Because the Neshama too was dependent on God. The Neshama's connection to Elokus is not its own, it's because it's dveikus and its attachment to godliness, and Hashem infused the Neshama with that power. And this is what he's going to touch upon now in this parentheses. That's why I wanted to elaborate, because he's bringing together in this next parentheses a lot of what we learned in the last few hundred pages even. So let's learn it inside, conclude the paragraph, and then I'll stop for, of course, any questions. But this is a very critical piece that I just elaborated on to contextualize and put everything into proper perspective. So he says like this now. Let's read inside. Not chayenu from Sevav Kalman or from Amala Kalman. Those are pipelines, divine pipelines. Havaya Elikim. Remember, Einoid goes even deeper than that. Same idea. Havaya is Sevav Kalman, often Elikim is Mamala Kalman. So that's the Yamayim, the first 2 days. The third day, La'asad Love, will be the Gili of Atzmus Ein Sof, Lefonov, V'Eifen HaChayis Lo Yeh K'may Achshav. And then the Nichya, the way we will gain Chayis, we will have, the vitality and the sustenance will not be the way it is today. Shanashama Mechayis Aguf. Today, the soul energizes the body, as we've been learning, and the person doesn't see the Muhusan Neshama. We know that a soul inside us is giving us energy, but we don't see and we don't perceive the very essence of the soul. Avala Asid, in the future, that will change. We will be able to see, yes, and Neshama Beguf will have Riyas HaMahus Nichya Lefonov. That means Nichya Lefonov. That will be able to relate directly to the Chayis of Atzmus. I guess to Riyas HaMahus, you have to also say Mahus HaNeshama, of the Neshama, because that's the context here. The Zeh Kol HaYiskatush de La'asid. This is the entire Iskachus. What will be, if you want to know the Chiddush, what will be in the future? That's a true, unprecedented experience. Kol Iskachus, a pretty strong statement he's saying here. The whole Iskachus of La'asid, Sheyeh B'chinas Riyas V'Asagas HaMahus. That we will perceive like Riyah, like with our eyes. We're talking about vision all throughout. The Riyah, the Ayin, will not just see with a light, an outside light, to see a certain amount of distance, even in the dark. But remember, we said Etzem Koyach HaRiyah sees from the core of the soul, can see forever. We learned earlier. So Riyah is V'Asagas HaMahus also in quality, U'Kamoshe Kosav. And these two psukim are actually brought in Likutei Torah. So I guess that Rebbe Rashab is connecting why the different verses. What does it say? The Nigla Kvod Avaya, that the Kvod, the glory of God, will be revealed. V'ro, the pasuk continues, Kol Basa Yachdav, that all flesh will see it. Why he doesn't quote Kol Basa? It seems to fit right here perfectly. I'm not sure, but he definitely says Chulu. Ki Ayin Ba'ayin Yiro. I guess the focus here is more the Riyah. The Riyah, that we will actually see the Mahus. Eye to eye we shall see. These are verses also brought in chapter 36 in Tanya. So it all ties together. Ukeshiyasalu b'chinas ha'atzmus. And when they will elevate to the level of Atzmus, v'nichya lefonov, it'll be v'nichya lefonov yiyah b'chinas riyah mamish. It'll be in a form of riyah mamish, and literally just as we see today the physical, in Lasid we will see the spiritual, or we'll see the divine, I should say. Riyah mamish. Okay. Now I know, even though the next paragraph is a new paragraph, but frankly, in Likutei Torah, it flows straight. This is a continuation of the Likutei Torah, because he says Mashenke and Achshav. So I probably would not make this a new paragraph, because that's La'asid Lave. So I'm going to read a few more lines. Mashenke and Achshav. So what? That's La'asid Lave. But Mashenke today. Today we don't actually have the Riyah. What we have today in this world is that Simoyan is the thirst to arrive. We have a thirst to reach this level. To reach this level of Riyah Chushis, to actually see, literally see. Let me just see how he explains that. Kamoshe Kosav, Samal Nafshi Lelakim. My soul thirsts to God, Lekel Chai, to the living God. When will I arrive? When will they arrive? The Eda and see you, basically. So that's what we have today. We don't have the realization of it yet. That will be La'asid Lave, but we do have the thirst for it. In the Elam Esal Yenim, they don't even have a thirst for it without us, without the neshamas coming down below. We have a thirst, and La'asid Lave, that thirst will be quenched when we'll actually experience it. I'm just reading another, just want to finish a sentence here. And through this thirst, so next page, 1462. And through this thirst, that's what will draw and ultimately allow us to achieve it. Because if you don't thirst for it, you haven't made a keli for it. So let's not minimize the thirst. The very thirst that we experience in this midbar, in this desolate world, that itself brings to Riyah. Remember, we said the word midbar asher isa. From the midbar that I shall see, he said, he began explaining it. So now he's coming back. So the midbar, the tzemoyin, is what causes the Riyah. Like it's written in Siddur, the Siddur of the Mittler Rebbe, they gathers together my Marim of the Alter Rebbe on Siddur, the Shar Rosh Chodesh. There's a section there on Rosh Chodesh. Ubelukut Teira and Lukut Teira b'dibra maskul v'hoye midah Chodesh b'chadoshe. Amayim Lukut Teira hoye midah Chodesh b'chadoshe b'inyan shemesh b'shabbos zdaka l'aniyim. I'm going to stop here because he's now going to go more into this. We'll stop here by the Kamosha Kosav. So bottom line, he's going to explain how this thirst brings to Riyah. That's the next section. But I'll stop here on the top of page 1462. So that was somewhat of a lot said here, but I'd like to stop now and allow you to ask, if you like to ask anything.
Where does the Inyan of I'm going to paraphrase here, but the Inyan of Ein Od and the Inyan of the moon will shine brighter than the sun, and the Inyan of that from the Gashmias will actually be revealing more elokus than the Or. I mean, those are other themes we've struck about Lasti Lavo, and I don't necessarily see that in here. I certainly appreciate the idea of seeing the reality of things and seeing Atzmus and seeing how things really are rather than the opposite. But where does that other part that we've been learning about fit into this picture, if you will, if it's possible to reconcile that?
Well, it's more than reconcile. It's the same theme. I actually did explain it a few times, not every class, but a few times on Sunday or sometimes when I made the bigger summations. So I've a number of times explained it. I'll no problem saying it again. And I'll say it as many times as we need to. So the general context in that sense is this. If you recall, there's the two ways of interfacing between the divine and existence. Mamata l'mayla, right? Aramimcha l'kai hamelech, from the bottom up, like tefillah, prayer. And that is that we come from the bottom and we we climb step by step, mutfa, murgish, muskul, to the point we transform the tzimtzum, we reach this highest levels, not just of avayahu elikim, like v'yadaita yem v'shavesel v'vecha ki Hashem ki avayahu elikim b'shamayim mal v'otz metochas, but then we reach even to ein oid. What's ein oid? Not just that the helam of the tzimtzum leads to gilui, but it itself expresses the helam atzmi of atzmus, of God. And that was mamata l'mayla. That was around 550 pages, beginning from middle of volume 2 till the middle of volume 3. On page 1350, now we're on page 1461, 1462 already. On page 1350, the Rebbe Rashab, after concluding Ein Oid, he went on and then went back and said, now let's talk Mamayla Lamata. Mamayla Lamata is Torah, because Torah is a gift from above. Torah Oir. Torah is Oir. Is giving us from above the perspective of the interface. So that we're bringing down Reimamus, transcendence, into existence. Lamat Lamayla was existence, immanence, when going upward into transcendence, all the way up to Ein Eid and Atzmus. Now we're talking about bringing it downward. And Torah plays a prominent role, because Torah, in contrast to Tefillah, is Mamayla Lamata, from the top down. Then, if you go back to 1350, you'll see he right away goes into the discussion of ner mitzvah v'teira. That mitzvah is called a ner. Neshamas are called ner Hashem nishmas adam. And from there, he went right into the concept of the vision. He said, Nida Levaya there, he explains, first of all, the three things of the Shemen, the Psila, and the Oir, which, by the way, is going to be the next page on 1463, is going to return to that. So you'll see how it all connects. I'm just giving us somewhat of a preview of what we're going to discuss. And then he goes into the whole discussion of Riyah, contrasting that with the moon and contrasting that with the luminous stone, if you recall, the three types of Eir Makabel of Malchus. And vision has been the dominant operative concept that he's been addressing here, to see. And we learned that the neshama has two levels, the neshama above, the neshama below. So I've explained a number of times that we are now talking really in the section of Mamayla Lamata. But he went back to Mamata Lamayla because Torah too has two levels. There's the Torah as is given to us from above, but then there's the Torah that we, through our Yegiya and our effort, like he said in Torah Shebal Peh, Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, if you remember Talmud, is we are trying to find the clarity of Torah through our effort. And then he said, then he went over to Krishma when he spoke about Shema. Shema is Tefillah. And then he said in Shema too, you have Mamayla Lamayata or Mamata Lamayla. If you look there, the Yichud and Shema is also from the top down and bottom up. So I explained that even though Torah and Tefillah are two different tracks, but each overlap with the other. Tefillah has an element of Mamayla Lamata, and Torah has an element of Mamata Lamayla. And when you combine it all together, it comes together in an eloquent form, an eloquent picture of having both the power from above, that's the light that illuminates, like the Malachim and Torah and so on, that give us strength below and support, siyua, to be able to see the right path. Mamata Lamayla is the power that happens in the Shcheirani, specifically below. Ultimately, Einoid is connected to that, because only Einoid can only be experienced down below, b'chalol shalelam, as he said, with his total concealment. So even though he didn't use the word Helam Atzmi here, but it's directly connected to it, because you're reaching a place that he says higher than Giluyim, higher than Giluyim. So Atzmus is obviously even higher than Helam Atzmi, but Helam Atzmi is higher than all Giluyim too. So that's where it all comes together, that we are right now in the process of understanding a combination of Mamayla Lamata, Mamat Lamayla. Mamayla Lamata would be Torah's influence on us, illuminating our life, Malachim supporting us, the processing our Aveda and so on. And then comes the other way around, where the Neshama Dafka below reaches the levels of Einoid, Helam Atzmi, and all the way to Atzmus. That's the connection. So I've said this a number of times. That's not, by the way, trying to in any way suggest that it's not a complaint. I'm just saying it's fine to repeat many, many times because it's a very complex and big picture. And I said I'll reiterate or explain it again and again because it is the central theme of all of Ayin Beis. Now, we're going to get back to it. What I'm keeping in mind all the time is how much of this will the Rebbe Rashab himself spell out and how much are we going to have to spell out? Because I know that he doesn't conclude the Hemshech Mamish. There are things that he leaves not finished, but I don't know how much. We'll learn that as we go along. That's, to me, very exciting to find out how far the Rebbe Rashab actually connects all these dots. But it's pretty clear to me that these are the connections, and he's going to connect plenty more, and has already connected. So this is really a summation of all that.
Thank you. That was phenomenal, really. And yes, you have said these
I
things.
agree.
But the more we learn, though, the more it at least for me, it all comes together. You integrate.
You don't need to explain. In this case, I can tell you, I have no problem if you ask this question 1,000 times, because the fact of the matter is, it's not simple matter. And even you hear it once, twice, 3 times. I know it's something you have to constantly process because there's so many pieces here. And I only mentioned some of the highlights. There's so much more when you start really breaking it down.
Yeah. Thank you. That was really, really awesome. Well, that was a very powerful integration of all these concepts. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we'll stop here.
15 more
Stop at
pages.
What? Svi?
15 more pages.
I know. It's feeling like like I said, the end of camp, right? I'll go slow. to savor. It's like eating a good, to savor every moment, to savor every little piece here. We have to go very slow, right?
100%.
Was Rabbi Jackson, that last question that Yitzhak asked and you answered, I happen to have gone away. Did you record that?
Yeah, it's all here. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very fundamental. I would definitely recommend listening to it as many times as you need. And there's still there's a lot more to say, which I say, but we'll get there. Let me stop here, top of page 1462 or bottom 1460.